Up until about, 150 years ago, there was really no way to capture audio. And even more recently than that, capturing audio or recording it to be listened to later on wasn't really a thing. Before that, the only way to reproduce music accurately was for the composer to write it down, and then for performers to learn how to play that music on an instrument for a live audience. And over time, this process of performing and the process of recording have diverged to the point where they almost feel like two separate art forms at this point to me. Producing a recording and playing to a live audience require two very different sets of skills. And anytime you have two different sets of skills required to do something, you have two different camps that form of people who don't really understand each other fully. But as someone with kind of one foot in each discipline, I thought I'd try to kind of bridge the gap. So maybe, just maybe, here on the internet in 2024, two different groups of people can start to understand each other a little bit more. It comes as no surprise that classical musicians focus on live performance. They aim to interpret a composer's work. And that's entirely understandable since most of their repertoire was written before recorded music was a thing. And without that ability, which has been passed from generation to generation to interpret and perform a composer's written works in a live concert hall or live setting, a lot of those works would have been lost to history, and that would have been tragic. And to perform many of these works at a high level requires an incredible amount of skill and discipline and dedication, almost a lifetime's worth of work. You spend so much time just mastering the technique for your instrument so that that becomes almost second nature. Then you can get to the more interesting and more important aspects of interpreting things from a musical standpoint, and that's where the real craft starts to happen. I kind of like to think of being a classical, more traditional performer as being similar to an athlete. It takes not only the natural ability or natural inclination to do the thing, but it also takes an incredible amount of work, not just to achieve a certain level of mastery, but to maintain it. Things don't just stay where you leave them in terms of your technique. You have to constantly be working on it. It's like an exercise. So there's this constant battle to sort of keep the technique as sharp as possible. And many classical musicians have a reputation of being kind of snobby and looking down on other forms and other genres of music. And I get that, and I've experienced that, and I'm not a big fan of that outlook. But when you do consider the amount of time and dedication that it takes to pour into a single thing to become that good at it, I think you can kind of understand and forgive a certain amount of tunnel vision that can come along with that. I've had that myself in the past when I was just focused on that. And because they're so focused on the performance aspect, a lot of classical musicians, myself included back in the day, just view recording as a means of duplicating an exact performance. So it's not really the preservation of a work of art itself. It's just the duplication or replication of a single performance, like a one-to-one thing. The closer you can get it to the realism of a real performance, the better. As I'll talk about a little later, it's a lot more than that. Recording has so much more to offer than just duplicating a performance. I really don't enjoy the fact that performance is so fleeting, the fact that it's so unreliable in terms of reproducing the composer's intentions for the work. It can also start to feel really repetitive for me personally, and I lost a lot of my sense of creativity. I didn't feel like there was room for my own creativity as I was just trying to sort of regurgitate, for lack of a more eloquent term, the information that was presented on the page and then interpret it musically. And that was the only sort of expression of my own creativity I could endue upon that, was maybe the changing of a phrase here or there and shaping it a little differently. I would get very frustrated by the fact that, you could do something really special in a rehearsal or in the practice room in preparation for a recital, and then those things don't always translate to the stage. And that can be the magic of live performance in some cases, but it can also, if you're just trying to accurately depict what the composer had in mind, be a detriment. You have to not only practice the piece and learn the piece in the practice room and be able to play it there, but you also have to practice the act of performing, which is another skill. When the adrenaline gets going, your heart starts to race, you still have to learn how to channel that energy into something productive rather than allowing yourself to fall apart from a technique standpoint. And I would spend so much time trying to replicate that perfect performance that I felt like there was no room left for my own creativity. And I know that that's something that other classical musicians have experienced, because they've reached out and told me that they've experienced that as well. And that's exactly why I've found recording and manipulating my own ideas to be so creatively freeing, and why I've gotten into production and recording and releasing my own recorded music. The idea that I can sculpt something exactly as I want it to be is really fascinating to me. It's something that I think maybe visual artists get to experience a bit more than musicians who have always been recreating things live. When I don't have to worry about the act of recreating it later, it really frees me up and allows me to explore things that I wouldn't be able to do live. I was asked in an interview last year about my EP Respirate and how I might go about recreating the tracks in that in a live performance setting. If you're unfamiliar with that EP, it's basically a set of live improvisations with certain pieces of hardware, modular synths, and hardware synths, just recorded in one takes. So whatever happened, happened, and I captured it all in the moment. And one of the things that I love about modular and hardware synths that don't always have patches that are easy to recall is that it's hard to get those things back. And that's a real pain if you're a live performer. You don't want that. Or if you're scoring to picture or something that requires you to recall those exact sounds later, that's a flaw. But if you're just thinking of capturing a moment in time, a moment that is a performance at that point but will be recreated and duplicated later on in its exact form, it can lead you to places that you would never go without it. You get more interesting, more unique sounds, but it is hard to recreate them later. So the answer to that question was, I don't even try, because I never perceived those to be something that I would want to recreate later. They are snapshots of those performances at that exact point in time. So I've started to think about my own recordings like a painter might think of his or her paintings. And I don't need to see the painter paint the painting in order to appreciate it and enjoy it for what it is. It's fixed in time. They've already done that. It happened, now it's captured on the canvas. And this shift in thinking really changed my perspective, because I was always thinking about, how am I going to play this live? How am I going to play this or perform this later on? And it wasn't until I started thinking about it this way that I realized I don't have to. And if you listen to a pop production or something, you may not find it musically interesting, depending on your taste. But what you will notice is the production itself is where the real magic is happening, and it's really hyper-realism. So just like in a painting, the painter might exaggerate certain lighting elements or shading. I'm not a painter, so I hope I'm using these terms right. The producer might exaggerate things within a mix so it feels hyper-real. And if you sit and listen to a great, well-crafted mix that was well-produced, well-recorded, and you sit and listen in a good room with a good pair of speakers or headphones, you can hear things that in an actual performance setting would be kind of blurred together, because you can create this sort of hyper-realism with a production. You exaggerate the elements that you want to really pop out. And just like a painting or sculpture, while the work itself is fixed in time, its environment can change it. So if you listen to a mix in a very dead room like this with a good pair of speakers, it's going to sound one way. If you listen to it in a live hall through a PA, it's going to sound a different way, just like different lighting affects a painting and lets you see different things in that painting. And as someone who just moved studios, I'm all too aware of how the room that you're in affects what you actually hear in a mix. So to play devil's advocate for both sides, classical folks could learn a lot from producers. They have incredible ingenuity and creative freedom, I've found, to try things, just experiment with things that as a classical musician, I might have felt a little boxed in when I started of not really wanting to do something that I wasn't given permission to do, right? And I think a lot of us classical musicians feel that because it's such a strict environment where we are so tunnel vision focused. And as producers, we can certainly learn a lot from classical musicians as well. I've certainly been around a lot of them and have learned a lot from them in terms of the fact that they're some of the best musicians in the world, and the amount of dedication and delayed gratification and perseverance that requires is going to help you in any aspect of life, not just in music. If you would like to learn more about how I personally, as someone who has been recording and releasing my own music for the last 10 years and playing piano for a lot longer. If you want to see how I incorporate some of the classical things that I learned in composition alongside the modern production things that I've learned in the last 10 years, I have a free ebook that's in the description down below that you can download at your convenience if you're interested.